I was born December 21st, 1960. In second grade, I decided that I probably needed to use my real name. My real name is John Jeffrey. It felt like I was in trouble every time they called my name, if you can imagine that, because that would be the name that Mother, when she was angry, would use. So I went back to Jack from that point. My parents are John Paul Duman. He was born here in Cottonwood. He was from Cottonwood. My mom was actually born in Canada. Her middle name is Marjorie, Cecilia Marjorie. Her mother's name was Cecilia, and she was named after her mother because they didn't think her mother was going to survive and come home from the hospital. So, which she did, and then they were probably, I don't know, I think she was like 2 or 3 when they moved down to Mont Angel, Oregon. Meanwhile, Dad's family, I'm not exactly sure why, but they moved to Portland for a while, and then they ended up moving down to Mont Angel, Oregon. And so Dad had gone into the Army. Mom and Dad got married while they were still in the service. They started out in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And then when Dad mustered out, he was actually headed back for the Willamette Valley, and they stopped to visit in Cottonwood. And I can't remember the name of the guy's name, but they were down at the bar having some beers, and they convinced them to stay in Cottonwood and work. My oldest brother, Tom, would have been just born at that time. And I'm not exactly sure how Dad ended up with the dry cleaning business, but it fed the family through the years. The rest of us kids were all born here in Cottonwood. My oldest brother, of course, is Tom. The next one would be Doug. He has since passed. Next one is Dennis, and I had another brother, Jim, who was about a year and a half older than me, and he was killed in an accident when I was about 6 months old. And then, of course, I came along, or I was there, and then Johnny come lately, Stacy, came by about 6 years later. Being the only girl of the family and the baby, she was spoiled rotten, and she knew it. So I grew up with a lot of older siblings. We had a house on the hill just outside of the city limits of town, and had some property there. Always had animals around, dogs, cats. But yeah, there was a lot of fond memories, though. We had always had at least one horse around. Sometimes we had 2. So that was back in the days when summers lasted forever, it seemed like. But we had this horse, Dynamite, and that thing was tall and rough to ride, but it'd let you do anything and everything. I mean, we had one of those radio flyer wooden wagons with the racks on the side. It was great fun to tie a rope on the horse and drag it around the pasture. One Christmas day, we were tired of sitting around the house playing with our toys, and Mom and Dad decided we needed to go up and visit Mark and Maxine Tackey, lived across town. So we all piled in the car. Tom, of course, was a freshman in high school, so he got a ride in the front seat with Mom. And of course, Stacy, the baby, rode on Mom's lap, and the rest of us 3 boys, outlaws, were in the back seat. So we pull up in front of Mark and Maxine's house, and we start piling out. And of course, us boys are quick and nimble, and we're piling out of the back seat. And as we're getting out, Mom's now, you guys be careful you don't get your fingers in the door. And about that time, she reaches out and grabs both sides of the door jamb to pull herself with Stacy on her lap out of the car. So I slammed the door shut, and she let out a squeal. And Tom, of course, saw what happened and opened the back door. And she got out and pulled her gloves off. She was wearing gloves, and she pulled her gloves off, and her finger fell out into the snow. So we all loaded up and were very quiet as we went to the hospital instead of going to visit Mark and Maxine. I took Mom in, and Dad, of course, at that time, little kids weren't allowed in the hospital unless you are the sick one. So we all had to sit in the car, and Dad took her in and got things going there, and then he hauled us home and dumped us out, and we were on our own recognizance for a while. But we were much subdued at that time. And it was a very eventful Christmas day. So, of course, then after that, we had Christmas break yet. So Mom was home from because she couldn't go because she had this big cast on her finger and her hand because they'd sewed her finger back on. And boys will be boys, and we got to raising hell in the basement and causing and fighting and carrying on. And she came down, and she had Dad's belt in one hand and her hand in a cast. And she was screaming and yelling and mad. And she said, I'm just so tired of what am I going to do with you? And she threw her hands down like that. She did not realize that she was standing right against the wall and smacked her hand into the wall. And we were all kind of sitting there, and she just kind of watched the color go and turn white. And she limped back upstairs. Yeah, that was one of those deals where it wasn't a very pretty scene when Dad came home from work that night. It was not good. So when we were growing up as a business venture, Dad decided that there was going to be some good money to be made in sheep. And being the shrewd businessman that he was, had the ability to picked the absolute worst time to buy sheep because the price was up, and within a year and a half the price bottomed. So here we are with about, I don't know how many ewes we had at that time. I think we started out with about 30, and with all these sheep, and we ended up in the sheep business. And so we fed. At one point, there was that small piece of ground where my shop and Mom and Dad's house is, that Dennis lives in now. We had 400 head of sheep up there in that little pasture. Most of them were feeder. I think we were running about 100 head of ewes, and we would buy some feeders and feed them out to butcher and whatnot. The price was never any very good, but Dad come up with a scheme that we would get the chaff from the elevators, from them cleaning the grain, the screenings, and that was what we were going to feed. Well, needless to say, that whenever they screen the grain, there's mostly weed seeds in there. So that piece of property up there was quite the weed patch for a long time. In fact, it's still an ongoing battle trying to keep the weeds at bay, but it was always interesting. So then at one point we decided we needed a bigger barn to feed all these sheep. If we could streamline the production, that we would do good. Dad scored, I forget whose property it was, up on the butte, and we went up and again took the horse up and the tractor up, and we were skidding all these poles out to build a barn. And we got them all hauled home, and that was going to keep them boys out of trouble, as they were going to peel all these poles. by hand. Yeah, Dad spent an awful lot of evenings out there trying to get through the pile of poles. We could usually get one a day done, all three of us. Of course, Tom was already moving on to a real job, so we ended up building this barn for next to nothing. And then Dad decided that we needed to be in the pole business, and we had a machine to peel them. And that led to another business enterprise, and the sheep went away, and we started in with the post and pole business. And again, that never did pan out to make a whole bunch of money, but again, we always ate well. My brothers would bring girlfriends home, and they always thought that we were wealthy because the amount of food that was always on the table. And I was like, well, don't you guys have food? But there were 4 boys and a girl around the table, and when Mom made spaghetti, she had these big bowls like this, and there were 2 of them full of spaghetti that were on the table, and might be enough left over for lunch the next day. So everybody had their own steak, and there was an extra steak in case somebody needed more. And she grew up in a German family, of course, and you cooked food until they stopped eating. When we started out in school, was still the St. Joe's Catholic School. There was still the Catholic school in Green Creek. There was still the Catholic school there was the public school in Cooterville. There was a Catholic school in Ferdinand. And that was till the 2nd grade, and that was kind of the point of the financial collapse of the Catholic schools and the consolidation of all the schools. We had 70-some kids in our class, and for us, for Cottonwood, that was getting right up there. I think we ended up graduating in my class 76. I had a Datsun pickup, God rest its soul, when I was in high school, and the second time I had it on its top was finally the demise of it, but it sustained a lot of learning curves, let's call it that. Then whenever I wrecked that, Dad, he had a Rambler sedan with a 6-cylinder in it that he was just sure that I needed. But I had found a 69 or 67 El Camino that I was sure I needed. I think the finally winning straw to let me get it, as I had told him that I would, if I had the Rambler, I'd just take it out and beat the crap out of it anyway. So he conceded and let me get the El Camino, and I ended up repainting the whole thing. Painting cars was kind of fun. It's a lot of fun to take something that doesn't look very good and make it look really nice. The other discovery was that other people were willing to pay you to do that. And when you're in high school, that leads to a lot of beer money. 1979 was when I graduated. After I graduated from high school, I started logging, and which always led to a 3-month layoff. And unemployment just wasn't enough, was enough to subsist on. But if you wanted beer money, you needed to do something else. So ended up doing body work in the 3-month layoff and painting stuff, so I had enough money to party and whatnot at the time. One thing led to 10 others, and ended up that as a living. Clear back whenever I was delivering laundry for the cleaners, I distinctly remember coming up and delivering the dry cleaning at George Subert's house. And here was this cute little dark-haired girl come and answered the door. Of course, you got to remember back then, I would have been 74, 75. And the hairstyle was the Beatles type cut, where it was And I'm not exactly sure how my brothers persuaded our parents to let us get that style of haircut, but that's what we all sported at that time. So here I am with my haircut, and here's this cute little girl answers the door, and I'm like, "Ooh, she's cute." Kara distinctly remembers commenting that her stepmother, Marge, says, "Well, who's at the door?" "Oh, some hippie delivering laundry." She was been about a senior year. I decided I needed to go out with her. And mom and dad weren't so impressed with that idea. Her mom and dad weren't. And it was more after she graduated that we were able to date a little bit more. So we ended up getting married on August 10th, 1985. We were living in this little apartment above the city electric, mostly because my brother owned the building. And I ended up getting a job at Olive's Auto Parts and worked at a parts counter for 5 years. If it weren't for the fact that I spent every night up at the shop working on something to try to make enough money to live, we'd have starved to death. People talk about, not having enough money to live, and it's like you're just not working hard enough or you're not managing your money because at that time I was making $800 a month before taxes. Kara finished school. She was driving back and forth to Lewiston. Fortunately, she had enough money set aside to finish paying for her schooling, but we still had to live. Thankfully for her parents, we ended up buying their house. Finally, I decided that I wanted to go into business doing the body work full time. Our 3-year plan ended up being a 5-year plan, and started out business on a shoestring rather than with a little bit of bank, but it ended up being all right. The good Lord provides. Bit of a struggle to get started. Had a bit of a setback about 8 years ago when the shop burned to the ground. Lost everything and found out just how underinsured I really was. But it's going good now. The kids were born. We were of the philosophy that it was good to keep two of them together, so that they kind of grew up together as brother and sister, or pal friends. Uh, Ended up with 3 boys and 3 girls. Not exactly boy girl boy girl. It was boy girl girl boy boy girl, but that worked out. Uh, each one, of course, is their own individual person. Wouldn't trade any of them off. I mean, I don't know if anybody else would have them, but they're ours, and we get to keep them. Now the grandchild count is 6 girls and no boys. So, but again, I wouldn't trade any of them off. Being a grandparent's a lot easier than being a parent. It's a lot more fun too. It's interesting to see the different personalities the grandchildren have as opposed to their parents. One of the things in life that has proven true time and time again, um, that the good Lord, as I said, the good Lord is looking out for you. If you allow Him to help you, He will. And a prime example of that would have been when the shop burned down. Um, it wasn't, oh great, woe poor's me. It was a matter of me and the wife looked at each other and like, okay, the good Lord's trying to tell us something. Could He just say it? What are we going to do now? What should we do? If you work with God, He will work with you. If you work against God, you are pretty much on your own. But